Begin with Secretary Reich. He has been one of the stars of the Clinton cabinet. He has been driven by one dream, which is to make American workers more skilled and to have them enjoy the benefits of American middle-class life. And I'm pleased to have him here to talk about that and other ideas. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
It's good to have you back at this table and back on the program. What have you learned, before we talk about the issues that you've been speaking to, how is being a member of the President's cabinet, being Secretary of Labor, different than you expected from your perch at Harvard, teaching and writing essays and writing books and participating in seminars about the way government ought to be?
Divine retribution, Charlie. Here I spent 12 years talking about it and talking about skills and developing the workforce, and now I'm there. I have to do it. It's not nearly as frustrating, it's not nearly as bad as the press makes it out to be, as people on the outside might think it to be. In fact, it's very exciting. It's a wonderful time. There's a lot of bipartisan support for education and training initiatives. They're not getting very much press, but I think that's because there's so much bipartisan support for them. Politics is not an interesting spectator sport if everybody agrees.
Yes.
And we have, over the past year and a half, done a lot with regard to Goals 2000, the school-to-work apprenticeship program, reemployment process and assistance.
I thought Goals 2000 was the Education Department.
Well, the Education and Labor Departments are working very close together. Dick Riley calls himself the Secretary of Education and Labor. I call myself the Secretary of Labor and Education. You can't separate work and education any longer. It's a matter of lifetime learning.
Yeah, but is it much more difficult or not as difficult as you imagine to put ideas into play, to make ideas operative?
It is different than writing, obviously,
yes.
But it is a matter of getting down, rolling up the sleeves, getting into the nitty-gritty, working with a lot of people at the community level, at the state level, a lot of politicians. I know most members of Congress very well by now, but like any enterprise, it calls for just a lot of hard work. I think I violate the wage and hour provision of the Fair Labor Standards Act in terms of the amount of time I put in and the amount I'm getting paid for it. I'm blessed by a terrific bunch of career civil servants, by a president who cares about my issues. He cares about workplace development, education, and skill training. He understands the issues that I'm working on. And so I don't want to paint too Pollyannish a picture. Obviously, there are frustrations. We're not getting as much done as I would love to get done. Healthcare was a big disappointment. I worked very hard on that. We're going to come back again next year and fight
with
harder.
Whose program?
Well, we're right now discussing that. The question is, what kind of an approach are we going to take? A lot depends on the makeup of Congress.
Well, you know, the expectation is it's going to be a lot more Republican than this Congress. What lessons did you learn from that health care battle? Ross Perot was here last night, and he blasted health care reform by the Clinton.
He blasts everything.
Well, but basically what he blasted was the process in terms of in secret and all the people and releasing at the last moment, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Charlie, there were mistakes made along the way. It was too large a group of people and the secretiveness nature of it, and then coming to Congress with a big 1,800-page, you take it or not, that would not happen again, but there was a great deal of effort that went into it, a lot of bipartisan effort. By the end, it got pretty partisan, but you look at so many Republicans were actually engaged in the health care debate. We made a lot of progress from when Bob Dole said there's no health care crisis. I mean, even he admitted there was a crisis. We need to do something about it. It's still with us. Health care costs are still rising.
Senator Moynihan said there was no health care crisis, too.
Well, but he came around as well. Yeah. You look at that cost, Medicare and Medicaid going 2 to 3 times faster than inflation. But there's another issue that Americans are grappling with, and it's related to health care, and that is the widening gap between people with skills and those without skills, education and non-education in terms of earnings.
To read your speeches, you speak to that more than anything else. Now, I don't know whether that's been a preoccupation with you, but tell me how you see it and what's the role of government in providing American workers with skills.
Charlie, over the past 15 years, things have got progressively worse in terms of inequality in the United States. We now have the most unequal distribution of income of any industrialized nation, and much of it has to do with the unequal distribution of education and skills. This isn't a matter of genetics. This isn't a matter of
So what do you think of Charles Murray's book then?
Well, I think it's just wrong. I think it's very dangerous because it gives solace to people who don't want to do anything. Regardless of someone's genetic makeup, skills can be learned, and skills are directly related to what you earn. This is a high technology economy. Every industry, even your basic Rust Belt industries, are becoming technologically driven industries. We're now an international economy. We have seen a shift in demand, very profound, in favor of skilled people and against people who do not have the skills. Skills can be learned. We've got to upgrade education. We've got to upgrade training. That's the only way we're going to do anything about this widening gap.
But is it the role of government to do that?
I think the role of government is, number one, to ease the transitions from school to work. That's one thing we're doing. We have a school-to-work apprenticeship program. Again, not very much publicity about it, but we're going to have 500,000, 1 million kids over the next couple of years engaged in this kind of transitional program. The role of government is to ease the transition from work to work. There's no job security any longer out there. Mm-hmm. People need help in getting the next job counseling, good information about where the jobs are. The old unemployment insurance system is obsolete in the sense that people are not going back to the old job. It's not a matter of just temporarily losing your job on layoff. You have to get the next job. And there is also a role for government in helping people move from welfare to work and stay off of welfare. Government obviously can't provide the jobs. The private sector has that responsibility. The private sector also has a major responsibility that it is not yet fulfilling. The best companies are, but in general not yet fulfilling in terms of training workers on the job. Much better to train a worker on the job than to get rid of the worker and downsize because you don't have enough talent.
It is at least conventional wisdom that corporate America acts in its own interest, yes?
Well, not only is it conventional wisdom, but it is indeed economic reality.
Okay, then why aren't they training their own workers?
They are beginning to. The best companies in America, you look down the list, Motorola and Kodak and in fact, there's a very, very long list. If you look at Ford, a lot of the major auto manufacturers and the subsidiaries are doing more training right now. They're all beginning to train their workers, and they are seeing that long-term profitability and long-term productivity is related to training, because your workers are your most precious asset. Any competitor can provide the same equipment, the same machinery, the same low-wage workers. If you're interested in low wages, anybody can go to Southeast Asia. The only thing that you have as a competitor, and I'm talking to you as if you were a business entrepreneur, the only thing you have is your workers, their skills, their talents, their dedication. And what is shown is that those businesses that are investing in their workers are doing better. Now, obviously, they're not all doing it. Why aren't they all doing it? I think there's a kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest operating. Eventually, they will all, because those who are not doing it are going to do more, are just not going to do as well. But we can't wait for the next 10 or 15 years.
So does it require, David Broda had a piece yesterday or this morning in the Washington Post, an esteemed political reporter in Washington, as you know well. And he basically talked about, in Maine, Hillary Clinton came there to campaign for the Democrat. And the governor of New Jersey, Governor Christine Todd Whitman, came to campaign for the Republican. Christine Todd Whitman was coming with her message from New Jersey of lower taxes, cut government spending, and we will rise, all the tide will raise all boats. And that the First Lady was talking about government programs and traditional liberalism as the key to the future. And let me finish, and I don't want to be unfairly characterize this, but mainly, forget the word liberalism and traditional, mainly an activist government role. Are we seeing in this country sort of a very basic division and debate now about what is the appropriate role of government in the very kinds of things that you're talking about? Yes. Not just welfare, but job training.
Yes, there is. But let's not get wrapped up in labels, conservative, liberal. I think there are two ways in which, given that capital is now global, capital is moving all around in search of the highest rate of return.
Right.
There are two ways in which you as a state or you as a community can attract global capital to raise the living standards of your people. Number one, you can say, come hither, global capital. Come here because we have the lowest wages, we have no regulations, we have the lousy environment, we have it's so cheap to come here and produce. You can't beat us. And our cheap labor and our cheap taxes and everything, low taxes, combined with your capital, high return. The second way is to say, come hither, global capital. We have one of the best educated workforces and the best infrastructure of highways and bridges and information infrastructure, so that your capital combined with all we have to contribute will generate a higher return. Now, strategy number one, which is the low wages, low taxes, low education, low skills.
Yeah, but why do their argument is essentially, I mean, it seems to me that you're stacking the deck in the argument when you make it that way. It is, their argument is not just, is not low wages. Their argument is in fact the reverse of that. I mean, is low taxes will generate business opportunity and create jobs, and low government spending will do that. That is a more effective economic vehicle, means of creating jobs and creating good jobs, because it attracts the best companies to a region.
But I think the old way of dividing the world between public sector and private sector,
right,
with conservatives the champion of the private sector and liberals the champion of the public sector, is wrong-headed. The real issue is investment versus consumption. Public and private sector investment versus public and private sector consumption. What we need to do, whether it's New Jersey or the federal government or even in the private sector companies, you've got to increase investment. You've got to increase education.
Well, they would argue
cut
taxes and give corporations that money to invest in new plants and new factories and the creation of new jobs. That's the way you provide capital from saving and capital to create jobs.
Well, again, I think the argument would be it depends entirely on what the taxes are being used for. If the taxes are being used for building the capacities of your people to be productive and to add value to this increasingly global economy, that's exactly what you want your taxes to do. Now, obviously, it's not just a matter of more money. You've got to reorganize your schools. You've got to make sure the training programs work. You've got to make sure that consumers have some choice and there's accountability in the system. Sure, you've got to do all of that. But are you using the taxes to go backwards, or are you using the taxes to help your people move forwards in the global economy? The same thing with regard to the private economy. Are you having companies that are treating their workers as assets to be developed and nurtured and trained, or is it a company that treats its workers as a cost to be cut and treats workers as sort of disposable pieces of machinery?
The reason I ask you these questions is because, one, these are the kinds of issues you grapple with as an academician and now grapple with, as a cabinet secretary. Is the problem in politics today that the American public doesn't trust the implementation and the consequences of the kinds of investment, whether it's public or private, that you're talking about? They have lost confidence in Washington to handle those resources?
I think right now, Charlie, and I spend about half of my time as cabinet secretary outside Washington. It's one of the best parts about this job. I talk to real people in real factories and places of work.
I know that to be true because when I read all your speeches, they're all coming from different places around the country.
One thing I'm learning from people is that there's a great deal of anxiety out there. Yes, the economy's better. 4.6 million new jobs since January of 1993. We are not facing inflation. All of the economic signals are right, but people facing a new economy. You know, the recession's over, but the old economy didn't come back. Right. This is a new economy. You've got to get different skills. Often companies are downsizing, they're restructuring. There's a lot of anxiety out there. There's a lot of anger. People say, in effect, they don't use these words, but they say to me, in effect, look, the Cold War's over, the recession is over, and I'm still sliding downhill like I've been for the past 15 years.
Or my wife has a job and I have a job which is necessary for us to make ends meet and pay the tuition for our kids to go to college.
And we're working harder and harder for less and less. That is true of many Americans today. Even though the economy is buoyant, even though the economy is doing well, for 15 years Americans, most Americans, again, those without high-powered educations, have been on a downward slide because the economy, the global economy, technology has changed so radically. And those Americans who feel so anxious right now are understandably lashing out. Look at talk radio, that otherwise sparkling tribute to free expression. It has become a center of rage, of absolutely escalating rage, blaming immigrants, blaming foreign traders, blaming bureaucrats, blaming the poor. There is a lot of anger out there, and this is the atmosphere in which demagogues can take root. People who really do wield blame, who don't want to face the essential problem, and the essential problem is we've got to educate, upgrade our workers. We've got to make sure that they are genuine partners in enterprise. We've got to change the way we do business in this country. Instead of taking the responsibility, there are a lot of people, again, who want to cast blame, push responsibility outward, using the cynicism that is out there and exploiting that cynicism. I think the political decisions that Americans are going to be making in November, this coming November, are really decisions about whether cynicism is going to win out over a sense of, by golly, let's just pull together and stop complaining and get on with what has to be done.
The president has spoken of that issue as well. I mean, when he talked at his year-end last year, I mean, he talked about his frustration in dealing with the cynicism and the sense of everybody questioning your motives. The cynics question the motives of people in government. Let me turn to an issue that you are also, and I want to just reflect on that for a second, in terms of a philosophy. You talk about a new compact between workers and business and government. Is that a viable compact?
I think it's a necessary compact. I'm not sure it's viable yet, Charlie. Again, there are leading businesses that are treating their workers as assets, investing in workers. The government is working with those businesses in the sense of providing some tax advantages or some grants with regard to expanding here and there. Government should not be in the business of business, but government should be in the business of helping educate and train, particularly when businesses cannot do it all themselves. By the same token, government cannot do it all themselves. The private sector has a very important role to play. Now, we talked a moment ago, are businesses going to take up the challenge? I think the best businesses are. Do we have time to wait until all businesses discover that they've got to do this if they're going to have a good workforce?
Are there any other incentives you can give them to do it other than their own self-interest?
I've talked to business, no, not other than their own self-interest. No, the businesses are not in the business of charity.
No, I mean by that, is it a question of the use of the tax code or something else that will
there
provide
may be.
the appropriate incentive for them?
I've talked to a lot of businesses, and I said, if you, business leaders of America, if you feel that you need some tax incentive to do more training and upgrading of your workers instead of just restructuring and laying them off, let us know. In fact, lobby for the kind of tax changes you need to do better by your workers. I've said to labor unions, make training an object of collective bargaining. They're starting to do it. Instead of simply wanting to hold on to what you have, again, look to the future, look to the jobs of the future. Educators are beginning to work with businesses. Labor unions are beginning to work with businesses and educators. It's happening around the country, and I've seen it. It's not happening enough.
One other issue within your jurisdiction, the baseball strike. You, as an old Red Sox fan, I assume.
See, Red Sox fans learn how to deal with
pain.
Adversity.
Yes, they do.
And it's
disappointment.
Good preparation for all that we've talked about.
Will it make a difference that you've appointed a mediator to engage the two parties?
I think, frankly, Charlie, the only hope for the 1995 baseball season is Bill Ussery, who's the special mediator that I appointed. He has a terrific talent for bringing people together. Both sides now agree to sit down at the bargaining table.
The conventional
seriously.
wisdom is that ownership, now that they've lost the revenue from the postseason, has no incentive to make any concessions and might as well give up the first half of the 95 season.
I've talked with players and owners more than I ever even want to think about over the past 4 months. And it was only the past week and a half that I heard both sides say, now is the time
to save 95.
Seriously save 95.
Okay. Last question. You and I have talked before, even before he became president, when President Clinton and your long friendship and when you were on the boat going over and you were sick and he took care of you and your bond formed out of that in terms of providing tea or something. You've got this economy that's doing well. Despite what Ross Perot says, he says that the figures are not accurate that are being released by the government. My understanding is that NAFTA has not seen a surge of jobs going to Mexico.
No, that giant sucking sound from the
didn't
South
take place.
Did not take place.
Now,
it's
is
not,
it true that jobs are being
jobs.
created because of this, because that there's a demand on the part of Mexican companies, Mexicans for American products, and American products therefore American companies are creating jobs in the United States?
Exports to Mexico went up 19% since NAFTA went into effect. And it's only logical. Their tariffs against American products before NAFTA were much higher, 4 times higher than our tariffs against products coming from Mexico and the United States. You get both sets of tariffs down, it means we have an easier time exporting to Mexico. It's the same principle with GATT. Some people are nervous about opening up all of these third world markets. We have virtually no tariffs against most third world products. Our tariffs are very low. Their tariffs against American products are very high. If everybody agrees to take their tariffs down, we have many more export opportunities.
Give me finally what you think that your friend, I started to say, and you are a friend of Bill and at the same time a longtime colleague and now a member of his cabinet, has to do to overcome the odds that seem to be against him in terms of re-election? What is
I think the
case he has to make?
I think the only thing we can do, and all of us talk about this, and we come to the same conclusion. We've got to keep our heads down and continue to work hard on the issues that Americans care about crime, about health care, about education and training, and keep on going.
Is there a battle, an issue you have to join and draw a line in the sand and say we're going to fight for this principle or for this issue, for this idea? I
think we have to fight on all of these fronts with regard to what average working Americans care about these days. I referred to that increasing gap between the people at the top and everybody else. It's also true with regard to benefits, its wages, its education, its training. We have got to make sure that there is shared middle-class prosperity in this country. It's not happening right now.
And the best way to do it, you believe, is A, create jobs, and B, provide skill for those workers.
Create jobs and skills, but also health care. The crime issue is not going to go away. We've got to take that head on. We have taken it head on. The only antidote, it seems to me, to the cynicism that is abroad in the nation is to work as hard as we can on the issues that Americans care about. And the President's going to do it, I'm going to do it, the entire Cabinet's going to do it. We can't afford to be discouraged. I think we can be indignant about the naysayers. I'm indignant. I mean, you just have a lot of Republicans out there saying no, no, no. I think the American public are going to get tired of hearing people say no. They're going to say, we want some very fundamental things. We don't want big government. We don't want big bureaucracy. We're actually shrinking the federal bureaucracy right now. We just want a couple of things that are so important to us. We want our kids to be able to live better than we do. We want them to go to college. We want to make sure that if they're not going to college, they have an opportunity to get apprenticeship programs and the skills they need for the future.
But that's the issue. Who can best create that for them?
Well, it's public and private
that issue
sector.
is not being simply fought out, to me. I mean, the political debate in America, it seems to be so because of cynicism, because of the shrill voices that are being heard on both sides of the issue. You don't have that essential debate taking place as part of the political campaign. Just look at the commercials you see running in California, in New York, and in Massachusetts.
Oh, it's very negative.
It's about everything except the basic foundation and these basic questions of who has the best prescription for the future. And how do you test the merits and the ability to deliver in terms of the diagnosis that the respective candidates make? I'm out of time. Robert Reich, Secretary of Labor, former professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard. Always a pleasure to see you.
Charlie, it's great to see you.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Stay with us.